If I asked you to paint a picture with your mind, what would you imagine? This is a really open-ended question with many answers that are ultimately affected by what impacts your life the most. Books, movies, music, art, upbringing, and considering you don't have aphantasia, the inability to visualize and recall senses. Maybe you imagine a lavender-painted field laden with butterflies under azure skies, or a dense cityscape lit with nothing but neon hues and lunar glow. And look, I know you didn't come here for the inspirational talk, but authors, musicians, and artists all do the same thing as you're doing now. Daring to imagine. The only thing that separates you and them is effort. Maybe the next great piece of art is locked away in someone's mind, with the only key being the right amount of practice to catalyst an evolution into reality. Maybe you are that someone. Until then, we'll have to make do with what we have now. Recently, for a separate video, I've been working with a myriad of words and tinkering with encoding. Hopefully that video will come out soon, but meanwhile, I'm getting to do all sorts of research into topics that were probably taught to first-year CS majors that, in my journey, I just missed out on. And besides learning about the basics of ones and zeros, I also got to learn about the bigger brother, the byte, and how most things that make up a keyboard can be translated into 1 byte. And as Tom Scott would say, that is a massive oversimplification, but for the most part, true. And if we forget about the binary byte and focus instead on the base 10 version, there is one particular thing that we can do with it that has been burning in the back of my mind all week. Because in my video where I created a Photo Everyday Twitter bot account, I did a little research into how images are stored on the computer. And lo and behold, images are stored as bytes as well. This may seem obvious to me now, but at the time, I had never made this realization. My imagination was ablaze with ideas and theories of how I could get my vision to the forefront. How could I go about creating images from code? What would I translate into digital art? What would it look like for our favorite stories and books to be encoded into a bitmap made specifically for those words? Have you ever been so moved by an idea that just going about your regular day-to-day becomes a blur? The idea seemed simple at the time. Split a string into words, for each loop through each word, grabbing the byte value for each character in a nested for each loop, add all of those bytes to a byte array, and use system.io to write all bytes to a PNG file. So, I tried that first. I wasn't 100% sure that it was going to work, but I knew that both text and images were made up of bytes, so the theory was sound. I ran the code, and the PNG file was created, but there was no image. The reality is that images are more complex than I originally thought. I found this out the hard way through a rabbit hole of articles and YouTube videos explaining how images work. Turns out that while I was correct in thinking that images are just an array of bytes, with each byte corresponding to a pixel value, I failed to think about pixel depth and image compression and formatting algorithms. Firstly, pixel depth. If you've ever opened an art program, you might have been greeted with the RGB slider that determines the color that you're currently painting in. For each color, red, blue, and green, they have a value of 0 to 255. The same value of a byte for each. Pixels work the same way. So that means if you're working in color and excluding the alpha channel, which determines how transparent the pixel is, you need a pixel depth of 24 bits or 3 bytes for each pixel. Which is 3 times more than I had originally thought because I'm dumb. But while this is important to know, it still wouldn't have made a difference because image compression and formatting is a thing. We could see this in practice with a simple test by using math. We know that a color image needs a bare minimum of 24 bits per pixel because RGB values. So if we take a 500 by 500 color image, we can calculate how big the file should be, right? This means the image should contain 250,000 pixels at 3 bytes minimum per pixel, means that the image file should be 750,000 bytes large, or about 700 to 800 kilobytes. But if you check the properties of your image and get the actual size as it is stored on your computer, you will find, depending on what is in the image, a size that is drastically smaller. The plain image I used of a red circle inside of a blue background was around 14 kilobytes, about 52 times smaller. You can see the benefit. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I fully understand how compression and formatting works, but I did understand that in order for my idea to work, I need to not only determine the value of each pixel, but then let my computer do the compression and formatting for me. One visit to Google later, and I discovered that the uncompressed version of an image is a bitmap. If there was any way of me being able to set individual pixel values, it was going to be through a bitmap. One visit to Stack Overflow later, and I discovered a DLL called system.drawing, which is not immediately included in .NET frameworks, but it could be added as a NuGet. Adding this to my project allows me to work with bitmaps. I did some tinkering and was finally able to write up some test code that simply took 4 pixels inside of a 50 by 50 bitmap and turned them red, making a red line. May not look like much, but this image was a breakthrough for me. Next, I need to see if I can convert text into an image. I took the code I had already written and made a few tweaks. I wrote a string of text, converted each character to a byte using a for each loop method I had written before, edited my bitmap to be able to fit each byte into the image dimensions, and then iterated through each character, converting each byte into different shades of red on the image, changing columns for each letter and changing rows for each word. The result was lackluster, but this brought about the second burning idea that I had when I had originally concocted this plan. Could I convert an image back to a readable sentence? Yeah, there might be some encoding issues with punctuation, but at least from my tinkering, the English alphabet is always represented by the same bytes, and readability shouldn't be an issue. So I reversed the code to pull a bitmap from an image and then iterated over each pixel, pulling the red value of each and converting the resulting byte back into text. I've never been more hyped to see that something worked. What originally started as a passing thought while working on a completely unrelated project was happening right in front of me. Just one more brainstorming session and I could be converting all sorts of stories into images. What would they look like? The blur of thought thickened. Without hesitation, I got to work on the code. I made my algebra teachers proud and for the first time used the math that they painstakingly taught me. I combined everything I learned up to this point. Iterate through the characters to get the byte values. Create a bitmap to hold every character in a perfect square format. Manufacture a backwoods bullshit vector 3 using an array and a try-catch. Assign the pixel values based on the text in not only the red channel but all 3 channels, red, green, and blue. Iterate through the entire bitmap from top to bottom and assign each pixel 3 characters until every character is used. And then finally, save the bitmap. Everything was in place. Lastly, I needed to find a short story that I can copy and paste into a text file so my code could change it into art. I stumbled across a story by Madalyn Meyers called Burn Damage. The synopsis goes like this. The main character Beth, with a combination of her religious upbringing and living in the shadow of her well-behaved sister, has trouble coming to the terms with the fact that she may be gay. Instead of being explorative and experimenting with self-discovery, she decides instead to play it safe and be the person expected of her and seeks companionship with someone she could never genuinely love. After years of living this way from teens into her adulthood, the man she had grown comfortable with asked her for her hand in marriage. A wave of realization hit Beth as she realized that she couldn't say yes and no longer live the lie she had been. Realizing that she had wasted this man's and her teen years on not being comfortable living outside of what was dictated to her as normal. The final moral of the story is that it's better to live a life blazing and suffer the burn damage than to have never burned at all. My synopsis does not do the story justice. It is rather beautiful and awe-inspiring. The link is below if you want to read the full thing. Moved by the story, I eagerly copied the text and pasted it into my notepad file. Once nestled into the deepest folder of my project, I loaded the program, and like it was destined to happen, the code worked perfectly the first time. So, finally, the answer to my question. What would it look like if we converted the text from our favorite stories to images? Unfortunately, a lot like static. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense. The gray pixels you see are where the red, green, and blue values are all determined by lowercase letters that span the 97 to 122 range of the ASCII table. The other three main colors you will see, purple, yellow, and teal, are combinations of lowercase letters with a space mixed in somewhere, considering a space is common and is much lower on the ASCII table at 32. The rest of the colors are the outliers that are caused by punctuation, tabs, and new lines, with the black bar at the bottom being where I ran out of characters and couldn't fill a perfect square. As cool as it was for everything to work, it wasn't exactly how I had imagined. It wasn't a lavender field nor a neon-brimmed cityscape, but does it carry the same feel of Madalyn Meyers' story? I'd like to think so. Maybe I'd think differently if I would have converted more stories to images, finding out that they all look the same. But instead, I stopped here because life goes on, and I can stop staring into the middle distance. The blur is gone. You've made it to the end screen. Thanks for that. As my channel evolves, things will change from time to time, and I think this will be the first change. Recently, I've been relying heavily on making entertaining tutorials for content, and I don't exactly think I'm the most qualified to have a tutorial channel. I'm just someone who programs for fun after all. So instead, I have retitled all my videos to include a tutorial tag, so before clicking one of my videos, there is a clear understanding in what you're getting. I will still be doing some tutorials, but I'll be splitting my content between explorative research projects such as this and tutorials. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe within the next 10 seconds to win $1,000, maybe, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye.